This next story starts on a farm in Waitsfield, Vermont in 1945, where a merchant marine cook named Ralph Ellison was resting after his tour of duty.
One morning, scribbling, I wrote the first sentence of what later became Invisible Man. I'm an invisible man.
That's Ellison years later in an interview for National Educational Television. He wrote that his protagonist, a Negro as Ellison always said, was young, powerless, and ambitious for the role of leadership, a role at which he was doomed to fail. Earnest, naive, the Invisible Man travels from his southern hometown to Harlem and runs a gauntlet of discrimination by whites, betrayal by blacks, and confusion about who he is and who he must please. The Invisible Man tells his story from a basement apartment, a surreal refuge from a world that has cast him away.
Look at the book. It's crazy. It was regarded at the time as an experimental novel, and it's not a piece that you would look at and say, oh, it's a play. But the question popped out of my head, has anybody ever adapted this novel as a film or a play? And Ralph Ellison really didn't want that to happen while he was alive. He'd seen too many good books turned into bad movies.
That's Oren Jacoby, who, along with theater director Christopher Maccarone, got the blessing of the Ellison estate to adapt the novel for the stage. Their play debuted in Chicago and is now running at the Studio Theater in Washington, D.C. Jacoby says he decided to write the play while he was working on a project about Shakespeare.
Ellison seemed to understand that kind of rhetoric, and that, like a great Shakespearean speech where a character is faced with a decision about what to do, there's constantly an argument. Do I do this or do I do that? To be or not to be? Do I go underground or do I come out and be part of the world? And I felt that dynamic made this a very theatrical text, and that it just spoke out to me, and I thought, well, I better go for it.
The play, like the novel, opens in that lonely basement apartment filled with newspapers and magazines, a phonograph. The Invisible Man has wired his ceiling with light bulbs, exactly 1,369 of them, he says. It's an act of sabotage against the power company, but also an affirmation. The Invisible Man says, "Light confirms my reality." Director Christopher Maccarone describes staging that scene.
We wanted to really capture the essence of his whole. And we don't have exactly 1,369 lights. We're working towards them. But yeah, we wanted it to start in darkness with just the voice.
I am an invisible man.
And from there, a single light bulb comes on. And as he goes through his prologue, we fill the stage with light.
I'm not a spook like those that haunted Edgar Allan Poe, nor am I one of your Hollywood ectoplasms. I'm a man of substance, flesh, bone. And I might even be said to possess a mind. I'm invisible, understand, simply because people refuse to see me. They see only my surroundings.
And really the idea is that he doesn't ever leave the basement room. It's that these visions, these memories from his past, he's revisiting and acting it out, through his subconscious or whatever way you want to interpret it. And the story of the play is whether they give him the power by the end of the play to leave the whole or not.
And as you said, this narrator, the Invisible Man, much of this is playing out in a story he's telling, and therefore his mind and his memory. And maybe you could describe a scene where you weren't quite sure how it was going to come off the page.
Yeah. I think the most challenging scene to stage in the piece is the Battle Royal. The Invisible Man is invited to give his graduation speech before the town's leading white citizens. And when he arrives, he's asked to fight in the Battle Royal. He's blindfolded, put in a ring with other young African-American men, and reduced to an animal. To stage that scene with an ensemble of 10 blindfolded African-American actors was extremely, extremely challenging. Also because in the novel, you're always in the Invisible Man's point of view, and how can you capture the Invisible Man's point of view? And so we rely heavily on video projections, sound and lighting design to try and capture his fear.